Hi, this is Serafim from the Tesla Quartet, and I'm joined by Kalia Vandever, a wonderful composer, one of 12 who have written a great piece for us for Alternating Currents Commissioning Project. Thank you, Kalia, for joining us, and we're so thankful for your wonderful piece that you've written for us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure to write this piece, and I can't wait to hear how it sounds with you guys playing it.
Yeah, it was really fun to put it together. So for our listeners, I was wondering if you would be willing to talk about how Beethoven have influenced you, since that was a variation on a Beethoven's theme, and perhaps if there were any other influences you had while writing it.
Sure. Well, this particular project was really fun and exciting because, we had a basis in which to compose with. So, we were taking this movement of a Beethoven string quartet and writing our own variation based on that, which was really fun. And
Mm-hmm.
I've done something like this before. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so in that way, I was directly influenced by this particular piece when writing, specifically with just the melody. It's and the patience in the melody too. Like I'm really drawn to that when I'm writing as well. Just patience when playing and patience when playing a piece and a very strong melody, which this melody is extremely strong, beautiful, and poignant. And I was drawn to those qualities in that piece. So I tried to, while maintaining the overall affect of that piece, I did, I changed around a few things, but I wanted to like keep that affect in my piece as well. And other influences, I'll I'll describe some of my classical and jazz influences with this piece and just my writing in general. But I guess
Sure.
my classical influences would be Satie, and then more modern like Arvo Part. I really love his writing, and then jazz influences I'd say are Ornette Coleman, Billy Strayhorn, and this album I've been listening to a lot over quarantine has been Charlie Parker with strings
Oh
actually,
yeah.
and that's one of my favorite albums, jazz albums with strings. And so I've been listening to that a lot. Um, and then more modern influences are Ambrose Akinmusire and Jason Moran. I'm really influenced by. Yeah.
That's wonderful, and I applaud your ability to combine these two styles in your music. And I was actually just the other day listening to Dave Brubeck, Desert Island Discs. There's this really cool BBC program. I think it's from 1980s, and he was asked what was his influences, and he mentioned Bach, and he mentioned more in from some more modern Darius Milhaud, and one of his favorite pieces were pieces by Shostakovich. So sort of an interesting synthesis of these two styles.
Yeah.
You are a jazz musician, and I was wondering, how did you find that sort of intersection in your own career?
Yeah, I think I found that intersection. I came to that intersection when I just started listening to a lot of different kinds of music. From like late high school into college, I was constantly trying to find new music, just new as
Mm-hmm.
in things I had never heard before and things that sounded
Mm-hmm.
a little more unfamiliar to my ears. Um, but I was influenced to more, you know, modern jazz composers in high school. So Ambrose, for example, and
Mm-hmm.
this really great saxophonist and composer Walter Smith III I studied with in high school, and I'm definitely influenced by his writing and his way of improvising, and so that has influenced the way that I play and the way that I write music. And then going into college, I was introduced to more other composers who were influenced by such a wide range of music, similar to how I would write now and how I would
Sure.
identify as a composer, being influenced by a lot of people. But I discovered Jen Shu, which is a really
Mm.
um, Taiwanese and East Timorese artist who draws from influences from her heritage as well as other places she's traveled, and um, that has influenced the way that I think about my own heritage and including that in my music. A lot of my family is Filipino as well as like Native Hawaiian. Um,
Wow.
and I've grown up listening to a lot of Hawaiian music, and so I think in recent years I've delved deeper in that history and that music, and I've started a project inspired by my grandfather, who recently passed away because he immigrated from the Philippines when he was young. So I've been kind of diving deeper into that music, which has been really great. And Jen has definitely been an influence of mine in that respect. Yeah.
Fantastic. And you mentioned that you are a musician, you play trombone very beautifully, and I am fascinated by what is seemingly more common for jazz musicians to do more composing. As somebody who trained as a classical musician, I haven't really been pushed into composing as much as it seems the jazz musicians are.
Yeah, well, I something that I've thought a lot about is just combining both composing and improvising and having it be more of a cohesive thing than two disparate ideas. A lot of the things that I compose are based off improvisation. So like I'll record when I'm soloing or practicing at home, and I'll listen back and try to see if there's like any melodies or motifs that I really like in that as a basis for a song. When I was thinking more about how I want to sound as an improviser, I think that went along with how I want to sound as a composer as well. You
Sure.
know, it's like being able to define what my sound is in both areas and then fusing the two. So
Yeah.
that was kind of the beginning of my journey as a composer, but it's still true today. Like I'm still thinking of ways to combine the two in a more cohesive way.
That's fantastic. As a musician, you have produced a lot of great music and performed all over the world in best halls in the United States. But you have also, in addition to that, been very outspoken about some of the social issues, misogyny and sexual harassment, namely in one of the pieces that you wrote for Medium. And I have read it, and um, I must say, I was incredibly touched by the bravery and honesty, and I just applaud you for your courage to come out and speak about these issues that many people just wouldn't have the bravery to do. And uh, for those of you who are listening, it specifically was about the Juilliard experience that you, Kalia, had. I wanted to ask you if you felt that there has been any improvement since the article, what kind of reaction you got from it, and whether with the current social movement sort of encompassing Black Lives Matter and other social justice questions, how do you think the world is moving to the better place, and has there been any significant change in your view?
Mm, yeah. Um, well, to answer your first question about the response after writing it, the response was incredibly positive.
Mm-hmm.
And it connected me with a lot of women around the world who have experienced similar things at their institution or just being a professional musician and being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
While it took a lot of courage at the time, I was incredibly scared to share those experiences, given that I hadn't really talked about them so much up until that point. But since then, just going through the motions of talking about those experiences and like recognizing when something like that is happening, recognizing when you're being sexually harassed, or recognizing when a teacher is being sexist or racist. These were things that at the time I recognized, but I didn't know how to address. Um, and I think that has definitely been something that I've learned over the last couple of years since I've graduated. How to address those issues in the moment, how to talk about them with other people, with other women, but also men.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my quartet is me and three men, so it's like, but it's important to me that they recognize those issues and recognize how my experience is different from theirs.
Right.
And I think, that's also what this part of the Black Lives Matter movement is discussing, is how the experience of Black Americans is extremely different from any white or non-Black person of color in America. And so
Right.
I think the finding the intersection of those two things in race and gender is really important. And these are conversations that like I've been having for a couple years now, but it's a continuous conversation. Um, Unfortunately and fortunately, it's a conversation that like I'll be having probably for the rest of my life. While there are some improvements in the jazz world, like there's still a lot more that needs to be done on an institutional level for sure. Um,
Hmm.
Definitely at Juilliard, but at a lot of music conservatories um, and just educational programs in general. There's a lot more that needs to be done on that level, and that's including more women on their board or more people of color on their board, specifically Black people. You don't see a
Hmm.
lot of representation in those ways. So I think that's something that like a lot of institutions really need to think about going forward.
That's a very eloquently put, and once again, I really admire your bravery and courage to bring these issues to light. And you spoke earlier about your family in the Philippines and sort of the influences you feel that you could sort of incorporate into your music, and for classical music at large, and I guess generally music industry, it seems that it's time for a change in expanding the diversity of the repertoire, really showing different voices and different opinions. And I was curious if you have any comment on how you think the classical music at large and jazz at large could be more effective in recognizing these perhaps voices that haven't been given much of an opportunity.
I think a good place to start is featuring composers, people of color composers. So, you know, especially with the classical world, which I'm not extremely familiar with being a part of, but you often see bills of composers of only white men,
Right.
and that's definitely been the history of Western classical music. And I know institutions are trying to diversify the composers that they feature, but it needs to be. I think with all of this, it needs to just be more inherent in the way that they operate, and less like, oh, we need to feature like this month we need to feature like a black artist or a black composer, because then
Sure.
you're just tokenizing someone. You don't want to do
Right.
that either. So you want it to be a part of the conversation, and I think another good place to start is just diversifying your board or your faculty. Like look at your faculty and see if like, oh, do you only have one woman on the board? Do you only have one uh, one woman in the department? Which in my case, I was one of two women. The other woman in the department being white. So it's like it's just thinking about overall representation and having that be like really something that you're actively striving towards, and not something that's like just one conversation that you're having, or you hire different people and then you think, okay, we're good. It's a lot more than that, and it's a longer process, and it's not something that can be solved overnight or just by having a concert of only black composers. It needs to be constantly embedded in the music that people study and that people play. So yeah, I mean that goes for classical music and jazz music. You know,
Right.
um, while jazz music is founded by Black Americans, I'd say that even at institutions, it's not always at the forefront of what they're teaching. They're not telling students that. So I think like that needs to be a part of like the initial conversation. Um, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm very optimistic just listening to you as sort of a new generation of the musicians and speaking from my point of view and my quartet, just to, we try very hard to really diversifying and hopefully we'll make a little bit of a difference.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you lastly about the pandemic and how it obviously has affected every single person on Earth. And it had some people had a really tough time coping with it. Some people actually had sort of a boost of creativity and took it as an opportunity to evolve. I was curious, how have you been affected by it, and if you have anything to share, particularly on that subject.
Yeah. I think initially it was shocking for all of us, to go from regularly performing and playing with other people to not playing with people at all. And so I think in the first month it was difficult, given that I was really looking forward to certain performances. But it's put into perspective what I want going forward when I do start performing again. Um,
Right.
because I do a lot of side woman work, so playing a lot of different people's music. And I think realizing now, like, what is the music that I want to play going forward? So that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. And what do I want for my band going forward?
Great. Well, Kalia, it has been such a great honor to talk to you and play your music. And we really thank you for responding to that project and writing this wonderful work. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.